In Hollow Knight, everything has been analyzed to hell and back. Everything from the written language on the signs to the Vitruvian grub. But out of everything that Hollow Knight has to offer, there remains one thing that has not been explained in the slightest: the parry mechanic. And at this point, you're probably wondering what the heck I'm talking about because we have two different videos that explain parrying in Hollow Knight. I'll link both videos in the description because they still deserve credit for the good things they discuss. While both people go into a good amount of depth with this mechanic, I alone have the deepest understanding of this mechanic, and the ridiculousness of it all. And I will now enlighten you about this mechanic with excruciating detail. In order to fully explain what's going on in games in general, there are three things I need to explain right off the bat. On screen, there are three words that will be important for us to understand. If you already know what each word means, feel free to skip to part 2. If you only know hitbox and hurtbox and have a basic understanding on how they work, you also can probably just skip to part 2. If you don't know any of these words, then stick around and be prepared to learn. So let's get into our first and simplest word, hitbox. A hitbox is a box, or I guess more accurately, just a shape in which damage can be dealt. This includes the knight's nail swings, explosions, spells, beams of light, and even the invisible spikes found in Gorb's arena. All these things can deal damage and are considered hitboxes, but not all hitboxes seem to perfectly overlap their visuals. Take the Brooding Mawlek for example. His swing looks relatively small, but looking at the actual size of the hitbox with debug mod, we can see how big this attack actually is. And when the knight touches any hitbox from an enemy, he takes damage. Well, kind of. Because if the knight should take damage by touching hitboxes, then why this? If you're in the know with Hollow Knight, you've probably seen this clip like 27 times at least. But why does it work? Well, obviously it's because the knight shrinks and, goes underneath the saw, right?
Wrong.
This is actually due to the slight difference between the other two words that we showed at the beginning: hurtbox and environmental collision box. A hurtbox is attached to the knight and pretty much every enemy. The hurtbox is like hit detection. If a hitbox overlaps with a hurtbox, damage is dealt. An environmental collision box, or ECB for short, is just a box for a character that interacts with the environment. The knight's ECB is just a rectangle, as you can see here. All it really does is prevent characters from walking through walls, floors, or ceilings. A hurtbox is what actually gets hit with an overlapping hitbox. The buzzsaw in this clip is just a circular hitbox, and using Shape of Un changes the size of the hurtbox just enough to slip underneath the saw. Here's an example that I found on my own. In the abyss, just before the Broken Vessel fight, there's an odd floating platform that's separate from the rest of the, platform. Notice the yellow ECB doesn't actually change along with the Shape of Un, only the hurtbox. This makes it that the knight can't actually slide underneath this, even though it looks like he should be able to. The ECB is still preventing him from walking through this wall. So only the hurtbox gets smaller and the ECB doesn't. This is a very, very long-winded way to explain how the knight can deal damage as well as how the knight actually takes damage. And with that out of the way, we can basically start getting into the most important part of this.
Yes, sir.
Welcome to everyone who started watching the video from here. I'm now going to explain what counts as a parry and how to parry in general. It should be obvious that the knight can only parry with his nail, except for, let's not talk about that character for now. But when the knight swings his nail and it overlaps certain enemy attacks, you perform a parry. And obviously, not all enemy attacks can be parried. Out of all the enemies in the game, only these 29 enemies can be parried. On certain attacks from these enemies, the knight can use his nail and on the right time, parry their attacks. But that's only partially true. I hope you brought something to write on because I'm now going to explain things in great detail. The knight's nail attack lasts for 4 frames, and any parryable hitbox that overlaps with this will perform a successful parry. But not every attack from these enemies were created or coded equally. Most attacks of these enemies only have one hitbox that matches their attack. Most attacks. Some attacks can be parried more than once. This sounds more confusing than it actually is, so let me show you. In the Watcher Knights fight, you can actually see the attack with a swing can be parried. But more importantly, each swing only has one active hitbox. Makes sense, right? But in this fight against Oro, you can see that his swings have 4 total hitboxes. We can see here that his first swing has 2 different hitboxes, and likewise for his second swing. So it's clear to see how each swing can be double parried, in a sense, despite the fact that this is a singular attack. And as far as I'm aware, there seems to be some kind of issue when it comes to parrying and receiving invincibility frames, or iframes for short. It is true that when a successful parry occurs, the knight should receive a few iframes, but I couldn't get them consistently in my testing, even when going frame by frame. While yes, I want to be able to say that I can explain this fully, I can't. Part of the reason is due to the fact that I cannot seem to find a definitive answer to what frame rate Hollow Knight actually runs on. In my research, I've seen some people say 60 frames per second, 24 frames per second, and I saw a large number of people saying around 30.
What the fuck?
It seems as though Hollow Knight doesn't seem to follow a strict frame rate at all times. This means even if I were to advance frame by frame, the game itself may not actually advance in that same rate. I'll discuss this a little bit in greater detail in part 3. Speaking of which, in Kripsu's video discussing parries, he breaks down parries into 3 different types: early, perfect, and late. However, in my testing, I found that there are technically only 2 types of parries: fake parries and true parries. I say technically 2 because there is a normal parry, where the knight's hurtbox doesn't touch the hitbox and is unable to be hit regardless if the parry succeeds or fails. But in both fake and true parries, there is a risk of the knight being hit, since the hitbox being parried will overlap with the knight's hurtbox. A true parry results in the knight not receiving damage, but a fake parry still damages the knight despite parrying the attack. But then why does it really matter? We already established that a successful parry rewards the knight with iframes. That's only somewhat true. Remember when we talked about the inconsistent frame rate of Hollow Knight? Well, that affects parrying. Some attacks have much smaller frame windows than others to perform a true parry, but because of the inconsistent FPS, some perfectly timed parries may fail and the knight still receives damage, or maybe the parry doesn't register at all, and yet you still get iframes. I've seen this plenty of times in my testing, and you probably have too if you're practicing parries for some odd reason. There is one boss, however, who in my testing always results in a true parry regardless of the timing. This boss is the Pure Vessel. During his triple swing attack, as long as a parry is successfully performed, that parry is guaranteed to be a true parry. And if you time your swings such that you hit all 3 of the Pure Vessel swings, you will also always true parry all 3 of these swings. Notice how the knight's hurtbox is overlapping hitboxes that should be dealing damage. This is the only enemy in the game where I found this to be true. So actually, I realized that NKG as well as Grim actually also perform true parries always. As long as you parry it, you will always be rewarded with a true parry. I didn't really realize this for a while. Neither did I really realize it in my testing, but I just wanted to let you know. All other enemies can be parried, but the knight can still receive damage. Fake parries. But with every other enemy, these fake parries are significantly more common. Now, while this is where I cannot confirm if this is the case, I assume that every parryable attack has a certain number of frames in which a true parry is possible. Now, while this is where I cannot confirm if this is the case, I assume that every parryable attack has a certain number of frames in which a true parry is possible. Some of them might be very short, some of them might be a little bit longer. But due to the aforementioned frame rate inconsistency, I couldn't reliably get a true parry on every enemy. However, I have gotten fake parries very consistently. Here's a few clips of me performing some of these fake parries. Notice how the sound and the visual effects of the parry both play, but I still receive damage. Looking at it more closely, we can see that a parry was performed, but the damage was still dealt despite the fact that the hitboxes are overlapping. I also assume that every hitbox that can be parried can also be fake parried, except for the pure vessel as we already discussed. Likewise, I assume that these hitboxes can also be true parried. One oddity I did find was with the jump slash that Oro and Model perform in their fight. I found that jumping around the 7th frame when they start descending, then inputting a down slash or a pogo on the 8th frame, it is possible to true parry this attack. I say was because I managed to get this once while I wasn't recording yet, and then I never got it again. Okay, hold on, time out. What is happening? I don't understand. I've been trying to get a fake parry on Oro for the longest time. I have been doing this for like 3 minutes now. I have failed on almost all of them. What the heck is happening? Nothing is different from yesterday. Hit me! What is happening? Why am I perfect parrying true parrying everything? I don't understand. Like, I can still get hit, yes, but like, how come everything is different from yesterday? What? This is so weird. I've never seen this before in my life. How am I only getting true parries? That should not be, like, a thing. Oh, that finally! My first not perfect parry. Or true parry. Holy crap, what is happening? I've never seen this before in my life. To wrap up our discussion of parries, here's 2 interesting attacks that can be parried. Revik is a spirit found in the Spirit's Glade. He protects the spirits found in this area, and if the knight tries to dreammail him or any of the other spirits, he begins attacking the knight. Revik's attack is simple and straightforward. He flies incredibly fast at the knight. But it's the speed of Revik which makes it difficult to dodge, but not impossible. But why dodge his attack when you can simply parry it? After all, parrying him makes him disappear for longer. Looking at the hitbox of Revik's attack, we can actually see that his body is actually the hitbox the knight parries. But due to his incredible speed, it's hard to tell whether or not parrying or hitting Revik's hurtbox is what actually causes him to disappear. Regardless, parrying Revik is not actually that difficult once you know the timing. Although you probably won't be spending any meaningful time in this area outside of lore reasons, or for the niche speedrun Ghostbusters percent. Our other interesting attack comes from Grim and his slashing attack. This is the only attack in the entire game that can be triple parried. However, parrying this attack must be done frame perfectly. As you can see, Grim has 3 different hitbox on this attack. His first hitbox lasts for 3 frames, his second small hitbox lasts for 2 frames, and the very skinny one here lasts for 4 frames, but it doesn't necessarily matter. The point of the matter is, the knight's nail only lasts for 4 frames, so you have to line it up perfectly so that all 4 frames line up with all 3 of his hitboxes. As I have done in this clip, you need to swing on this frame of Grim's attack in order to parry all 3 hitboxes. As you can see though, my spacing is a little off and the result is simply a double true parry. But then finally, I managed to successfully pull off the triple true parry on Grim in real time. It looks off because there is a visual bug with his hitboxes that happens occasionally. Sometimes when advancing frame by frame, the visuals of his hitbox will be a frame off, but it still functions as, the game intends. This technique can also be performed on Grim's more powerful form, Nightmare King Grim. However, the attack comes out 1 frame earlier making it much more difficult, even though technically that means there's one frame of leniency. So really, there's only two types of parries. Fake parries, where you successfully parry an attack but still receive damage, and true parries where you do not receive damage. Here's some clips that showcase both. And that's really about it. It's all based on timing, but it's more difficult because of the inconsistent frame rate. Those perfect parries people talk about aren't actually perfect, it's simply parrying multiple hitboxes in succession. So if it really is just timing and simply just that, then why is it never explained? Parries are an odd inclusion in Hollow Knight. There's no one to tell the player or teach how this mechanic works in the entire game. Yet it exists. The benefits of pulling off a parry aren't even that good. Outside of flexing or a desperate last chance at life, there really isn't much worth in attempting it. Let alone the fact that parries freeze frame the game for about 2 to 3 frames, which slows down the game, which is a cardinal sin for speedrunners like me. But who am I to judge? If you just like parries and simply enjoy hearing that satisfying sound, I don't blame you. Whether you like mostly using spells, or only using the nail, or even optimizing DPS as much as possible, Hollow Knight is a game where the player gets to decide the playstyle they want to have. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that. Except, there's something left unresolved. If you are paying close attention, you might remember me mentioning at the start of part 2 that there's an enemy who does not follow the same rules as the others. This enemy can be parried by attacks other than the nail, and this enemy may have a dark past. And while I have my own explanations on why this is the case, this is a topic for another video. So if you would like to hear more about this oddity and the potential reason why this happens in the first place, let me know. In the meantime, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, or your night, depending on your availability, of course. I have been Facade, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.